Alors, bonjour à tous.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here once again for this fifth and last webinar within the framework of our National Forum on Building Reconciliation, which will take place in a few weeks at the end of the summer, September 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. So before uh, having one of our two elders begin today, just to remind you that it is normal that your mics and cameras are off right now for this webinar. For everything that has to do with interaction, questions, or comments that you would like to have to send to us, you have two icons at the bottom of the screen with the chat function. The other function, the Q&A, for your questions. So you can chat with the chat function and ask your questions of our two wonderful speakers that we have today for our fifth webinar on issues and leverages for room for First Nations in governance. This is an important issue. And finally, as usual, you have the possibility of using our simultaneous interpretation function. All you need to do is click on the bottom of your screen, click on interpretation, the little globe there. And if you're hearing me, you're already there. So that is great, but that's where you choose your language. As you have seen, today's session is registered as the last ones have been, and it will be possible to listen the webinar by going to the website of the forum. So with no further ado, I would like to invite Mrs. Édith Picard, who is with us again, and she will do our opening prayer today. Mrs. Picard. Way for a few weeks now, the birds are giving us beautiful songs, and I identify the cardinal, the robin, the chickadee. But when I go out for a walk along the river at the end of the day, I heard a song that I don't usually hear. I couldn't see the bird. I was listening, but I couldn't recognize this song. It's like hearing without understanding. And it brought me to reflect on the fact that between humans, sometimes I don't recognize the language or I don't understand the meaning. But either I am not available, I'm hearing, but I'm not really listening. When I got back home, my son told me that it was probably a solitary robin. I'll find the right name. And we were able to confirm that. I was reading recently, so it's a thrush, a hermit thrush. To accompany, we need to understand. Yesterday, on the invitation, my son gave us this invitation, and I was able to visualize a webinar where the elder, Max Solis, was commenting or shared his reflections with us on the Kamloops tragedy. He exposes his vision with very much gentleness in communion with the Creator, the universe, the ancestors, and the earth, with a leitmotif, Megme. He was saying the spirit of these 215 children is asking us to love and therefore do what is necessary so that this does not happen again. He proposes that we observe a minute of silence in memory of these 215 children and to remember that their spirits invite us to love.
nous invite à écouter.
Invite us to listen,
Entendre, écouter et comprendre.
hear,
Bonne
listen, and understand.
Merci, merci
Thank
beaucoup,
you
Madame
very
Picard.
much, Mrs. Picard.
Effectivement, alors,
Yes,
ce cinquième
this
webinaire
fifth
se
webinar
déroule alors que,
is taking
je
place
pense,
as
tout un chacun se sent touché,
at the same
bouleversé
time everybody
par la
feels
découverte du corps de ces enfants.
completely
Nous savions bien sûr à travers le rapport
upset
de
and
la Commission d'éthique et
overwhelmed
réconciliation
by
que
the
des
discovery of
milliers
these
d'enfants avaient été
215 children. We knew through the Truth and Reconciliation Committee report that thousands of children never came back home. And of course, I think that everybody has the willingness to shed light on what really happened, not only in this residential school, but eventually in all of the 100 and more schools that took in more than 150,000 Indigenous children over the last century. So the issues are huge. And I think this discovery raises once again how far we come from with regards to education, and that important actions must also be taken up until today. And we are asking that question to our two guests today that I am very happy to welcome, Mrs. Suzy Basile and Mr. Denis Gros-Louis. We will have the opportunity to look at the role of Indigenous peoples in governance. So you have possibly have had the opportunity to attend our first four webinars, whose objective is, of course, to dig down a bit deeper into our understanding and look at the leverages that have to do with the question of governance and Indigenous people, but also to make sure that we identify concrete actions for solutions so that our meetings, that we have concrete spin-offs and results. And at the same time, we want to mobilize actors that should be involved, not only with First Nations and Inuit organizations, but also with Quebec, Canadian institutions, and territorial as well. So thank you again for being there for this fifth webinar. As usual, you know, we have 11 ambassadors that were selected and that provided us with some testimonies. In fact, many of you witnessed, and their sharing is very rich and interesting. So these are part of the capsules that were presented to you. They are still available on the website. So we prepared a fifth, if you will, a collection of these testimonies from our ambassadors, and after which we will continue our discussion with two experts, high-level experts with regards to education, Mrs. Suzy Basile and Mr. Denis Gros-Louis, that I will introduce as soon as we get back from this video with our ambassadors.
On identifiait des problèmes encore et encore et encore. Et on identifiait des problèmes encore et encore, année après année. Il y a quelqu'un qui a levé la main et a dit « Ça fait des années que j'assiste à vos réunions. Ça fait des années qu'on vous dit c'est quoi les problèmes. Ça fait des années qu'on vous répète les mêmes choses. Vous parlez de réconciliation, mais vous ne faites rien en fait. Vous faites que poser des questions. Donc, on vous donne les clés, on vous donne les réponses. Maintenant, c'est à vous d'agir, vous faites quelque chose. Parce que si vous passez vos années à à refaire les mêmes questionnaires, à reposer toujours les mêmes questions. On fait juste tourner en rond, en fait. Donc, on n'est pas dans une vraie réconciliation, on est dans une parure d'une réconciliation.
I think university for me as an Indigenous person was probably the most difficult because intellectually I was becoming more evolved, if you will. You know, I was reading more about history, Canada's history, politics, you know, colonization, all these things, and I was becoming more and more sensitive. In the university setting, Indigenous issues are kind of non-existent. And when I started my PhD, it was even worse because I had to begin studying for my comprehensive exams. But yes, of course, people are making efforts. You know, I noticed that there's the territorial acknowledgements in a lot of universities now, you know, in the beginning of a class or in the beginning of a presentation or a conference, or they'll have like a territorial acknowledgement, which is nice, but it's only symbolic, you know. It doesn't really change anything. That these like politics of recognition, like we call them, they skip some very important steps. And I think the most important step that it's skipping is just the truth. If non-Indigenous people want reconciliation, then just start teaching the truth in schools.
On n'a pas l'autorité, on n'a pas le pouvoir de faire de quoi qui répond à ce qu'on a vraiment besoin, parce que chaque communauté est différente. Puis développer des écoles où, qui parlent de la culture ou qui parlent qui développent aussi des intervenants de leur milieu, mais avec le volet avec l'approche holistique, c'est quelque chose qui vient, c'est quelque chose propre à la communauté selon leurs valeurs à eux, selon leurs besoins.
Le gouvernement nous a empêchés de se gouverner pendant très longtemps. Donc, on a un héritage colonial là. Je pense qu'en éducation, la réconciliation, c'est d'admettre que nos systèmes, nos structures, ils sont inspirés du colonialisme. C'est pas propice au dialogue, c'est pas propice au partage, c'est pas propice à être soi-même.
C'est tellement colonisé comme endroit et moi, personnellement, on m'a approché pour participer à décoloniser un peu les programmes correctionnels. C'est autre chose que scolaire, mais c'est un peu les mêmes objectifs. Et je me suis rendu compte que, dans le fond, ils veulent qu'on soit là, mais ils n'acceptent pas vraiment les changements qu'on propose. Puis ça, c'était pour les services correctionnels. Mais en éducation, à part être chargée de cours, je ne travaille pas vraiment dans le domaine, mais j'ai été étudiante beaucoup, longtemps. Et moi, je vois la différence quand il y a des acteurs présents au niveau scolaire autochtone. Premièrement, j'ai encore plus envie de me donner parce que je sais qu'il y a une compréhension mutuelle. T'sais.
On ne va pas vérifier qu'est-ce que les communautés ont besoin en matière de gouvernance. Puis ça, dans le programme de l'ENAP, c'est pas l'ENAP qui nous a fourni ce savoir-là. Parce que, évidemment, les enseignants de l'ENAP n'ont pas ce savoir-là. C'est les étudiants qui fournissent ce savoir-là aux autres étudiants. Donc, c'est quoi les enjeux de gouvernance de telle communauté? Comment ils ont réglé ça? On amène ça à la table et puis on se partage ça.
C'est d'aller reconnaître cette base de connaissances, de savoir-vivre, de culture, pour ensuite aller la mettre de l'avant et la mettre à profit pour les Premières Nations.
You have some frame of reference that we can develop programs with, that we can see that, you know, the programming that exists doesn't fit because you're trying to fit, you know, a circle in a square hole. You know, it doesn't fit. You know, there's an Escapi way of seeing things, and there's the model that's used in our current, you know, biomedical view of things. It just doesn't fit. You have to consider other things as well.
Ce que j'ai vécu après ça en faculté de médecine, c'est qu'on m'a dit « OK, il y a un programme, il y a 4 places de réservées par année aux Premières Nations et on s'attend de vous d'un engagement envers les Premières Nations. » parfait, je pense être une personne engagée. Bref, moi, j'ai ça en moi, je me sens vraiment engagée. Mais là, j'ai commencé à avoir des commentaires de gens qui m'ont dit « Donc, toi, tu fais ce cours-là, puis après ça, sur quelle communauté tu vas aller travailler? Qui va te prendre en charge? Puis toi, tu vas pouvoir aller t'occuper des Autochtones. » Puis pour moi, ça continue en fait de perpétuer une culture de colonialisme.
Et il y avait aussi l'affaire là dans les formulaires d'admission. Bon, c'est à l'aspect langue, c'était français ou anglais puis autres. Puis quand on marquait autre, genre Innu, la madame, elle m'a communiqué, elle m'a dit, bah, tu préfères-tu mettre français comme langue? Parce que si tu mets langue Innu, ils vont comme demander pour que tu fasses un test de français. On ne considérait pas les langues maternelles, les langues Innu, mais les langues autochtones.
Thing because the way the classroom is, you know, everyone sitting in a classroom, that's a very colonial way of learning. I think decolonization can be integrating more Indigenous knowledge, whether it be Indigenous methods such as land-based pedagogy, because the land has so much to offer and so much to teach us. But that's not really a belief in universities, unfortunately, but it is in our culture.
Je pense que la clé du succès, c'est vraiment d'aller chercher des Autochtones pour le faire. Je pense que c'est un incontournable. Je ne dis pas que ça doit être que des Autochtones, mais il faut que ça parte de là. Quand on parle de gouvernance, on parle vraiment d'autogouvernance. Les Premières Nations, c'est ce qu'elles veulent. Et je pense que le dossier scolaire en éducation, bien, on a des beaux succès. Hein. Si on regarde tout ce que la CAPN fait, entre autres, je verrais mal pourquoi le ministère de l'Éducation ne pourrait pas faire une place plus grande par rapport à, comment je peux dire ça, à déléguer les pouvoirs, à déléguer les services finalement. Donc, si on veut décoloniser, selon moi, puis on veut adapter les programmes scolaires, peu importe où se trouve l'université, ben ça passe par avoir des employés autochtones, selon moi, puis pas juste des employés, mais des gestionnaires, des décideurs.
Hiring more Indigenous people within the faculty and creating a safe environment for them, because I do understand there's not many Indigenous people who work within these faculties. There's maybe one or two, and often these one or two, they become burnt out because there's so much demand from them. So hiring more and making sure that Indigenous people you hire are supported and feel comfortable and feel valid.
D'afficher l'ouverture face aux Autochtones. Donc, je parle de communication, je parle de publicité, je parle également de... Ça pourrait être une bourse scolaire, ça pourrait être des galas de reconnaissance. Donc, qui fait en sorte qu'on est reconnu. Je pense que ça va que encourager en fait les gens à s'engager auprès de comités, auprès d'événements et même de s'afficher clairement en tant que Première Nation dans un programme postsecondaire.
Les initiatives par les Premières Nations, pour les Premières Nations, pour moi, sont garantes plus de succès. Ça répond à nos besoins, ça répond à nos attentes, c'est nos gens, c'est notre expertise, c'est vraiment important que ça se fasse. Pour moi, ça fait partie de la solution.
Moi, je suis rendue dans mon discours à essayer aussi de responsabiliser tous citoyens, autochtones comme non autochtones. Si on veut arriver un jour à la réconciliation, là, on a chacun notre bout à faire.
And with that, you know, I think, yes, we're acknowledging the past for what it is, not repeating what was done, and in doing so, having more of an open mind for how we can deliver education.
Just the educational system needs to be adapted to how things really happened. And I think when that happens, then we'll speak of real reconciliation.
Plus que ça va, puis plus que les écoles, les universités, cégep sont sensibilisés, puis ils croient beaucoup au potentiel là, de nous, des Premières Nations.
Puis je pense qu'il ne faut pas oublier qu'à travers ça, on a des gens qui ont les pieds un peu de chaque côté. Moi, je me considère un peu comme ça à travers le processus de réconciliation. Je me sens comme une courroie de transmission. Je suis à la fois autochtone et je suis à la fois allochtone. Et je pense qu'à travers mon développement d'adulte, j'ai su réconcilier les deux parties puis les faire coexister. Fait que là, je pense que maintenant, il faut le faire avec les institutions puis être là comme courroie de transmission puis écouter un peu tout ça puis dire, ben oui, il y a des belles choses puis il faut laisser fleurir ça puis s'écouter. On va connaître les enjeux de tous et chacun puis on va avancer ensemble.
Le mieux, mon rêve, puis je ne sais pas comment l'expliquer, ce serait comme faire un genre d'université pour les autochtones. C'est comme Kiona, mais une université, ça, ce serait vraiment un de mes rêves pour que...
Alors, écoutez, comme toujours, extrêmement...
So, as always interesting to listen to these First Nations and Inuit youth express themselves with regards to the challenges and issues that they face in their educational pathway. So we see that even today, there are many challenges for them. And to look at those today, as I mentioned, we have two guests. First of all, Mrs. Suzy Basile. Hello, Suzy. Thank you for being there with us. And then we have Mr. Denis Gros-Louis. Hello, Mr. Gros-Louis. Thank you for being there. First of all, I suppose that there are many of you who already know one or both of our guests today. I will take a few minutes to summarize their pathway. Mrs. Basile is from the Atikamekw community of Omotashi, Quebec. She has a bachelor's degree and master's degree in anthropology. In 2016, she defended a thesis in the environmental sciences PhD program at Université du Québec in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. This thesis is about the role and place of Atikamekw women in land and natural resource governance. Up to recently, I heard about this thesis and her expertise. And she has since then a professor with the School of Indigenous Studies at UQAT at the Val d'Or campus. In 2017, she set up a research lab on Indigenous women's issues, Miigwet'iyol. And since January 1st, 2020, she holds the Canadian Research Chair on Indigenous women's issues since 2010. She is member of the steering committee of Aboriginal Peoples Research and Knowledge Network, Dialogue. Since 2016, member of UQAT's Research Ethics Board as Indigenous representative, and since 2019, member of the Steering Committee and the Ethics Committee of the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. So I think we could continue with all of her achievements over the past years. Mr. Denis Gros-Louis, thank you for being with us this afternoon, rather. Yes, he's still in the morning. He's in BC? No, this afternoon. He is a member of the Wendat Nation, bachelor's degree in law and a diploma at the Accelerated Management Development Program at the Canada School of Public Service. He was senior manager at the federal government level for many years as director for First Nations and land management, among other, and assistant ombudsman for veterans. And he has worked with First Nations across the country over 30 years. His team received the prize of the Deputy Minister of Heritage Canada for the Winter games web presence. He also triathlete himself and involved in cultural and sports activities. And since 2018, he is on the board of directors of the, no, executive director of the First Nations Education Council, a new challenge for him. So thank you to both of you for being there with us. We will start with questions that are very important. They were raised by some of our ambassadors, and I would like to get you going on issues that are of a concern for you. So, Mrs. Basile, everything that has to do with research issues, governance, the presence of First Nations peoples in the decision-making process, with everything that has to do with research and all of the research protocol, and the tools that were developed, but that are also being developed as we speak. And on the other hand, Mr. Gros-Louis, for economy, and I know this is an issue that is dear to your heart, the implementation of autonomy. We've been talking about this for a long time. If I recall, it was in 1972 that already there was a document published that still today is a document that is a reference document. Indigenous education by Indigenous people. This document is now 50 years old.
Nous avons tout accompli la vision qui avait été.
We've all accomplished the vision that was elaborated in this document. So before beginning, I'll ask you to give us your reading of what the research issues are in the universities these days. Oh, big question. Well, first of all, there's a great deal of education and re-education to do at the university circles, whether we're Native or not. These are, we're talking about Indigenous issues here, but which once again require a lot of time and place in order to be more fully understood. So what I wanted to say is that research was an investigatory process, which is leading people to study other people, because before the times have changed, unfortunately, but we sort of see this old way of functioning where we are just being the subjects and not of the study and not actually initiating it. But of course, this research, if it's done respectfully and with the cooperation of Indigenous peoples, it's going to help defend causes, to highlight a phenomenon, to support negotiations or claims. There are events that took place with the recent events this week. We can say that yes, there are many things that remain to be investigated. There's knowledge and facts about Aboriginal people which are not known well enough, and which will have to be come out and be heard, because if not, we're never going to end up changing things. So I would say that one of our main issues, if I concentrate more on the Quebec region, is the labor force. To have Native researchers, even though there is a new wave of young researchers coming out of the educational institutions in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada as well. So we have some catching up to do, because in the rest of Canada, there are a lot of researchers and Native researchers and professors in many universities. In some faculties, we have even more than 20 Native professors, and in Quebec, there's less than 10, or maybe there's 5 or 6. And in the University du Québec network, there's 2 of us. So I was saying before, well, one of the ambassadors, I want to greet the 11 ambassadors. You've done very interesting work. I'm going to retain some of their words. And they also talked about the high level of solicitation, and even extremely high in some cases. So these are challenges that we have to be careful about, because this is becoming a real issue of concern, and I'll come back to this later. So yes, I hear that there is still a long-term work to be done to raise awareness of all of the stakeholders in the university circles. And also there seems to be a bit of delay or some catching up or a gap in Indigenous presence at the university. Mr. Gros-Louis, what is your experience? Well, you referred this. I just want to mention the elder and the ambassadors, and I'm glad that some of these issues are raised by the ambassadors because it's part of the message from the First Nations Education Council that I'm coming to express this. Thank you for all being here, and thank you, Suzy. So instead of talking about 1972 and our adhesion to the native takeover of the chiefs for take original takeover of Aboriginal education. We're talking about decolonization, so we have to talk about our historical context. And I noticed that since 1534, 1535, when Donnacona and Jacques Cartier met, we saw the first intervention of an external government in our governance. As you know, our nations, our Iroquoian nation like mine, we learned from our mothers in the longhouses, who were at the center of the activities of the longhouse life and learning. It was our house of learning. And when Jacques Cartier decided to bring Donnacona to Paris, he chose that he would represent them. So the first elements of colonialism have been there for a very long time. And we hear this coming up with his mention this week, and the sad chapter of the Indian residential schools had the effect of fueling for many generations, maybe up to 130 years in some parts of the territory, that made people mistrust colonialism and educational institutions. But it's only 50 years now that we've been allowed to attend post-secondary school. So I'm of the first generation of university graduates. So there was a big shift where we had to bring for an entire generation to reduce the level of mistrust and to bring the new generation into the educational institution. And this happened as much in our families. And the chiefs, they started and said in 1972, we have to take charge of our school network because of what I explained. And in 2010, they stood up and said, it's not just a takeover, it's control. We will take control of our institutions. And if I've got time, Alexandre, I would like to quote the chiefs from 2010 at the Assembly of First Nations when they said, the First Nations see education as a means to arrive at autonomy and to correct the side effects of colonial practices. All people have the right to conserve their cultural and linguistic identity, and education is an essential part for the realization of these rights. The control of First Nations, education by the First Nations will allow us to develop capacities we need to become autonomous, self-sufficient, and to conserve our languages, values, and culture. That's very strong. And then they conclude by saying this also makes up a solid base, which will allow the proud First Nations people to contribute in the development of our families, clans, communities, and nations. Thank you. That's very inspiring. And I would like to ask a question on what would be the next steps that have to be taken. Will there be a actual First Nations control of education, whether it's for elementary, high school, or college, or university? In your mind, what should be the next steps that can be taken to strengthen control and strengthen the Indigenous presence in governance at every level of education either Mr. Gros-Louis or Ms. Basile, either one of you. Go ahead, Suzy. I thought the question was more for Denis. I was listening, but I wasn't preparing my answer. So what should be done? Is that it? In your opinion, perhaps within institutions like yours or other observations in university circles, in your mind, what should be the next steps? I think our institutions, like others in Quebec, are on a good path by creating key positions, key strategic positions in university authorities and other levels, if necessary. This is an important step in the transformation of structures that where we are evolving now. Also, you also referred to this, Alexandre, for the Research Ethics Committee, and in our university we have an Aboriginal seat there as well, and I am not the one who's filling it for a few weeks now. I sit on this committee as a professor, but we have other Native people as well. So finally, we leave the room for qualified Indigenous people to take part in the establishment of rules, programs for education, research rules and education programs, I mean, and to become main players in this from the beginning. When we start to think of a new program or strategic positions, the Indigenous people have to be in the front ranks as well. And we can ensure that we can occupy these functions. And as I said before, what concerns me is solicitation. Everyone wants to do their part in reconciliation. Yes, it's very commendable, but at the same time, to take part in this to our full capacity, these people have to be available and want to take part in these efforts. And it's really what I notice as we speak. The level of solicitation is quite extreme, but this concerns me. I just want to mention this with what I'm doing now. Having with the Canadian Research Chair is means I'm doing a research. I don't teach. I'm not in the classrooms now. I don't teach at the bachelor's level of university as a teacher or a professor, an instructor, but that's fine. Other people are taking over, but as soon as we end up in authorities like that, we can't do what we were doing before. And sometimes this creates misunderstanding that she's a professor and we can't have her for this course. And I said, well, it's impossible. I'm doing other things now. So imagine all the other similar situations to this. And there's a lot of pressure, strong pressure, and the list of tasks to be carried out is very long. Then he also addressed this. We have to re-educate people, and we include ourselves there. And we are not all free of our past and our colonial past as well. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror. I think we've done this in the last few weeks with the health services, but in education as well. There are some things, there's progress to be made. Yes, it's quite the mountain, but we can climb it if we do it one step at a time. So I'll go back to what you mentioned before on the research protocols, the OCAP as well, ownership, control, access, and possession. And I just want to mention that over the last webinars, it was regularly mentioned, this over solicitation that a lot of First Nations and Inuit undergo who want to get involved, who have give them a reading, to allow them to contribute in enriching and participating in the governance process. And that's underscores the urgency of having our presence of graduates as well, and a stronger presence in different institutions. And the same question to Mr. Gros-Louis, in your opinion, what could be done? What could be the next steps to move ahead in this takeover of control? Well, this is a whole process. at the level of our organization, the First Nations Education Council, we can say that we can say can't say this set aside. Since 1985, we've started building our own primary and secondary institutions when the 22 communities in Quebec decided to work shoulder to shoulder to improve the schools and First Nations content and to bring back the pride of the First Nations identity in these communities. And I see people who I was talking about the elementary school. Sorry about the lapse slip up there, but they're also providing instruction, and also it can be trained in the First Nations languages. And of course, we have our first college for and by the First Nations, and the process in itself had to play out because with the process, when we tried to include the federal and provincial governments, we needed a sort of sponsor. Well, like the government will be the big, great, like the father of the First Nations. Yes, we needed a sponsor. So we're in partnership with the Abitibi-Témiscamingue and Dawson College, and now we're negotiating to say, yes, we can have our own governance council, our own governance committee. We've developed over the last 35 years, we've developed enough people to take over the administration and control of our institutions. That's one big step. And there's another one, it's another step to take, and Suzy will be happy as well as Ms. Audette, who we see online, and maybe if there's people from other universities. The next step is a university institution for and by First Nations. If we want to have this continuum of what we call a lifelong learning. It doesn't just mean to compartmentalize things into elementary school, high school, college, university. We learn our culture. All the nations of Quebec will say that we learn at all times. I'll come back to the image of the longhouse. From our birth and in the community, we learn from the community until we leave this world. So this is in our strategic planning for 2021, 2026 to lead our members to a higher level of graduation in university, as mentioned by Suzy, to give some support to Suzy. And this will give us the tools required to facilitate self-government and autonomy. And this is not the capacity of each community, and we will be taking on this capacity to control our own institutions. And yes, in fact, the FNEC also inspired is taking inspiration from this trend, and many other Native organizations are trying to develop their own university institution. And I want to continue with an idea that was mentioned by Ms. Basile, saying that the place that the First Nations and Inuit are taking more and more in the universities, but not just for the First Nations and Inuit, but they allow us to advance to make progress in institutions. And we're talking about the institutional, talking about the university circles. Ms. Basile, you're involved in these reflections around the control of data, the control of research processes and ethics regarding First Nations and Inuit. And we often put in the forefront the principle of OCAP, which is ownership, control, access, and possession as well. So people who don't know this as well could tell us what this is about and why it's relevant. So I'd start by just to situate the Canadian experience within the Indigenous world in Canada for about 20, 23 years. several first Indigenous nations and organizations came together and provided themselves with different policies and protocols, a bit like what's been happening with the Maori in New Zealand. And we have been a reference for other Indigenous groups throughout the world and said, well, maybe we should see what's going on in Canada to try to set up rules that suit us. And of course, it wasn't easy to set up. Of course not. But there were some interesting advancements as well. And the Research Council in Canada, they had with very clear messages coming from the First Peoples. They opened their mind. They said, well, maybe in our policy, we should set up chapters and guidelines that concern research in Indigenous context. And this came up very recently. Just to give you an idea, there is a group of reflection and reference that was set up at the Canadian level to rethink evaluation systems for research by peers. So why is it that in a Native context, these contexts don't really fit with the world of sciences? Let's say I'll stop on this subject just to tell you that these reflections are taking place and we're moving forward slowly but surely. If I come back to the more specific context of Quebec, I'll go back in the past and we talk about 2004, 2005, where some nations or communities in Quebec said, it's over. If researchers, we're going to close the door. They can't come to our communities anymore. And they just had to scoot out, and they're not going to come in and then you go away and publish our data and build their careers on our backs. And the FNQL, which oversees many of these organizations, like the FNEC, they set up a team, just experts, to set a basis for this, to say, perhaps your researchers and we, the Indigenous communities, could set up a way of doing things, just the main principles that we to make sure all the research is ethically acceptable, and that way we can perhaps include other tools, documents, and practices. It's fine if you write that on paper, but if it doesn't change anything on the ground, you're not getting anywhere. We understand that. And there, as the moment we're speaking, some communities now have their own welcoming committee, their own protocols for research. Maastricht, Assisibi, Ganawagi, among the Abenakis as well. There are some good things happening as we speak. And I had the opportunity to work within a company on many committees on the development of these tools. And the issue that we have to look into now is to ensure that the communities implement this. Yes, so we know that there's a lot of staff turnover in our communities, so sometimes we have to retrain, re-educate people in the sector, re-educate to come and accompany them. We're not going to tell them what to do. It's rather the opposite. We accompany these people in what they want to be done in the research. I'm really thrilled to see so many students in the master's and PhD level to that refer to this document from the outset, as soon as they have the issue and intention of research. And I hope that professors are also following them with this, and they will refer to what the protocols in Quebec and Canada to be able to start research that will be relevant for the researcher. Of course, we're not doing that for anything, but especially for the people who are concerned by the subject, which are the people from the communities. So it's a very dynamic environment that moves a lot, but it's quite fascinating. And I'd like to conclude by sharing a more personal anecdote. At the time when I was doing my PhD in environmental sciences. That's one of the hard applied natural sciences. And the first question they asked me is, what's your story for the link to the territory in science that says nothing? Where do we put this? Please explain this. How are you going to work on in this? And I remember that it was a weird question, because for me it was so obvious that there's a link between human beings and their environment, but it was a real challenge through a doctoral thesis to answer these kinds of questions. I didn't manage to elucidate all the mysteries, but nonetheless, I tried to place in environmental sciences, I tried to insert an Indigenous perspective that's almost absent. There are some efforts made, but I think one of the people, the things that the community say, well, the biologist who's doing taking a sample in our lake, can he also tell us what he's doing as well? And also could how us contribute to the research, because some scientific disciplines, once again, who don't know, who don't feel that find it necessary to ask the permission from the communities concerned. And that's another issue that we're working on slowly but surely. Thanks for being on the front and to be able to support Indigenous participation. I just wanted to mention before, sometimes we see youth where we are working on a master's degree or a PhD, and they have this idea of wanting to integrate a certain number of principles that you've evoked. And at the same time, when we look at the content of the education curriculums that most Canadians and Quebecers have followed until very recently, I think we can agree that there are several elements missing that those that would allow them to understand the issues, and that's why we should impose the addition of a certain qualification. It's over a year. This was refused at the Quebec government, but from a First Nations and Inuit side, it seems very urgent, more than ever, to be able to equip the youth so they can better grasp these issues. And Mr. Gros-Louis, I know this is an issue that is very dear to your heart. So what is behind the addition of qualification or skill 15? There are many factors. We want professors who will be competent in their knowledge of the First Peoples of Canada, and particularly in Quebec. When I say First Peoples, I include the Inuit. We have a reconciliation forum, it's excellent, which is in force, which is a table on the school's success for the First Nations and Inuit, where all the expertise is on the table with the government. And at the First Nations Education Council, we are going to soon be celebrating the 50 years anniversary of the document on the Native takeover with of education with a new autonomy government. So the new in education for the with the provincial government in education will be the FNEC for its member communities. And with this comes a whole series of changes on the government side, which will have to, first of all, just the choice of members at table. The minister will not have the monopoly of choosing this. We are in a nation-to-nation relationship. Another example where reconciliation is done in small steps. The Ministry of Education is trying to reform its kindergarten program for some years now, and proposes to do an assessment at the end of the year of 303 skills or qualifications between the youth between 30 and 45 to have a better load or a comprehension. And they said, we're not following you with this. We're going to take our values, we'll take our elders and our professors, our data, and we'll remake our own model of K4, which is based on the Tree of Life. We took the same main concepts that the government wanted to see, but we redid our learning tree for people, for the 4 or 5 year old children, to respect their community environment, their linguistic, their cultural environment. And we just narrowed this down to 174 skills, because there's a lot of social dynamic, which is essential at this age. And which wasn't considered. When the program was set up, we never asked for permission. But now we have the capacity to do it ourselves. We have taken charge of our destiny regarding the curriculum of kindergarten 4, K4. So if we want to succeed in setting up this program, you need professors who graduated, university graduates who understand our nations, who want to come and work in our communities. And that's where this occurred. And this was also influenced by the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee and the National Inquiry on the missing and murdered Aboriginal women and girls. We said there was something missing. We talked about our sphere of influence. That we're in education, so we proposed that the minister to Minister Roberge to review the curriculum and the training of teachers. And when they started the process to revise the profile, the skills profile of future teacher, you miss the skills or the knowledge of First Nations and Inuit. So if you're former links as well, until 2021, you say, do you think we still practice shamanism? That means that you have a problem of colonialism, a colonialization of your content. You've gone, you've been past, you're out of date. You have the intention of saying what it is to work in our communities. And that's why we're no longer in these Hollywood cliches.
Le Centre de formation de la main-d'œuvre autochtone de Wendake puis l'Institut Chagapesh.
We work with the Chagapesh Institute and the Development Center in Wendake to see what was important in the control of the content. What was important for our teachers or our students to be able to be comfortable in talking about First Nations and Inuit, and to be good influencers and teachers in our communities to help us to be able to take charge of all of these different stages and phases in teaching. This is where we propose to the minister to have an exclusive competency, a specific one, with regards to knowledge, history, language, and culture for the Innu culture. It was sort of, sprinkled in, but at the same time, with our reach out to the universities to work in their curriculum, we worked with that to say this was coming. But Suzy was mentioning we're a very small nonprofit, so we can't meet the demand. So we told the government, help us. Those are your institutions, these universities. Help us to have a position or certain positions that will be able to help maintain this collaboration link or relationship so that we can decolonize content. And the answer from the minister and public servants. Thank you, Mr. Gros-Louis. Can I add something? It has a direct link to what you just said, because I see these students. I don't teach in education. I teach in Indigenous studies, but oftentimes students from other disciplines come into my courses, social work. Just to illustrate what was said, you will certainly remember the fall of 2015 that pretty well shook everybody up, and especially the people in Val d'Or, in Abitibi, the Indigenous women there that denounced what they had been through, the aggressions. In all of the disciplines I just mentioned, I read in their works, I read their anger. And they answer me, why is it that I have to get to university to hear about the Anishinaabe of the people here, of the Anishinaabe people here, or in Sept-Îles, or in Joliette, or whoever. Why is it I have to come to university to hear about this for the first time? And with our online modules, we have people from all over, and I can read their anger and their. I had to register to a university course to get an ABC of the Indigenous people's situation. There's a lot of work to be done, and I hope that competency number 15 will answer to that, and that the government of Quebec will continue, because I do believe it is the momentum, and also that the different professional orders in Quebec will, with their authority, mandate that university programs include what has to be there in order for Indigenous issues to be understood by all of the university programs where students are registered. I just wanted to add that. It's a wonderful example, and I think that more and more Quebec citizens, Canadian citizens are conscious of the huge blind spot that we have left in present curricula. For example, people who don't know that the Abitibi and the Témiscamingue are First Nations. That's their name. These are terms that are there, that are part of their daily lives. And so we even forget what the roots of those words are. So this is very interesting. There is still a lot left to do with regards to the different topics that were raised for competency number 15. We have provided you with a link in our discussion, in our chat, with more detail on that competency, and it leads you to the First Nations Education Council's website. There's also a link towards the research protocol for First Nations of Quebec and Labrador. And if I recall, isn't there a third edition coming, Mrs. Basile? It's not a third edition of the protocol as such, but it's the toolkit of the principles for research in the Indigenous context. It's not accessible today, but it's very soon, very imminent. In the next days, weeks, all of these tools that the Health and Social Services Commission of Quebec and Labrador, there are university students and teachers who have added to this, and 2 other tabs were added to this toolkit for everybody's benefit. We talk about research projects that took place in Quebec, elsewhere too, but mostly in Quebec, and that were an inspiration and in support of Indigenous communities in documenting their claims. I know this will be very useful. Thank you. I think many have an eye out for the publication of this new version. Me to start with. Thank you very much for having contributed to this. And please don't forget, if any of you would like to ask any questions, we have a few minutes left only for this panel discussion with Suzy Basile and Denis Gros-Louis. Don't hesitate to send your questions through our question and answer feature. I would have a question if others don't. Just off the bat here, challenge with regard to a vision. Say I were to ask you, who would you like us to be? Where would you like us to be in 10 years or in 20 years in terms of First Nations and Inuit presence in governance? So in your wildest dreams, what would that look like, this vision for governance? Suzy, Denis? I'll go first. Sorry, Denis, I hadn't realized you had put your mic on. I am one of the children from Macasa, the Manitou College. My mother studied there when I was very small, and maybe why this has stuck with me. From a distance, I saw the birth of the Kiona Institute. I was working in another Indigenous organization at the time next to the FNEC, and I was really pleased to see the implementation of this institute. And I think it's a desire. Everybody mentioned this at the beginning, that a Indigenous university institution in Quebec would not be something too much. So I would like to say the UQAT, where I am right now, Université du Québec, Abitibi-Témiscamingue, is the youngest and the smallest universities in Quebec. And so maybe there would be successes to share there with the institution that will come to be, because the experience is there. And we also implemented the first and the only Department of Indigenous Studies in Quebec, 4.5 years now? So everything that has to do with the creation and the construction of such of such programs. Maybe in 20 years, I will be able to contribute in one way or another. We'll see that when we get there. Wonderful. Thank you. Denis, what about you? Well, from my perspective, it's in our strategic objectives at the First Nations Education Council to have a university project before 2026. So Audrey Basile, who is one of our representatives, I hope that your dream will become everyone's dream for all First Nations who aspire to higher learning, higher post-secondary teaching. And another element that I could imagine in the future before retiring, my seventh retreat, I'll be 90 years old by then, but way before then, I would like to have a university in Quebec that has a rector that comes from our communities. In my wildest dreams, of course, to see that the programs that are limited or normed or standardized by the ministry. You know, kindergarten was easy. There are no ministry exams that say, great, you have a good program, but a program that would recognize the teachings on our Mother Earth. That's how our youth learn, that we get credit for our youth who speak their own language rather than have a French or an English exam, that they master their own language, be recognized and worth credits to ensure us that these young people's pride remains and that they can transfer that pride over to their children and grandchildren. That would show that government would let go of all these simulations. In 2020, there are so many small technical things that to target the communities all the time. When this will have moved forward, we see this in competency number 15, two rivers will merge and flow together, and the water will continue in the same direction. This is where we will be cohabiting between this linear training, contemporary, colonialist, whatever you want to call it, and teaching lifelong learning as we promote in our communities so that these can merge, so that we can move forward together to improve and help for so that all the talents we see in the communities can come forth. We can see it this week. We saw it this week, the pandemic, you know, our youth couldn't meet each other anymore. Normally, at the University Laval, we said, what can we do? Where are the solutions? Let the First Nations take charge of their solutions. We created the Ancestors Challenge. Our 4-year-old kindergarten program was created at the university. So if everybody walks in the same moccasins to take the image of our ambassadors, I think we will work very well together for the future. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was fantastic to hear you and share your expertise, full of vision for the future. I think these are not inaccessible dreams. On the contrary, I think there's a whole movement that is going forward right now, and it's an invitation for all of the other Quebec and Canada leaders. And so we want to walk in these same tracks, in these same moccasin tracks for all stages in education and until life's end. I really like this lifelong learning, that learning is never over. I would like to thank you immensely for having been with us, Suzy and Denis. It was really great as a closing for our 5th webinar. And as always, we had our platform where we were able to rally all of your expertises. We would ask you to add to this collective intelligence tool online, Padlet. So you can click on like on those that you feel are the most relevant. So again, you'll see the link in the chat. To close this fifth and last webinar, I would like to invite our two co-presidents of the forum to speak to you, Mrs. Michèle Audette and Mrs. Johanne Jean. So, hello, Michèle. Hello, Mrs. Jean. Thank you for being with us. So maybe we can start with Michèle Audette. You already know her because of her many involvements over the years. She is main advisor with regards to reconciliation and education at University Laval, and she will be followed by Mrs. Johanne Jean, president of the Université du Québec. So Michèle, go ahead. Thank you very much, Suzy. Always impressive. And you make us proud. I can say that, Suzy, you make us proud. And I often tell you this by texto. Right now, my texto is virtual and everybody can hear me. How you make me so proud. And if you make me proud, others as well are already following your moccasin tracks or portaging after you. Denis, I really liked our meeting when I went to University Laval, this ambition, this willingness to continue what our Kukum and Nushums wanted us to do at in education. Our parents went to Makaza, and we have a wonderful Kiona. And that ambition, I share it with you so that our teaching home can find certain different ways. If the Quebec society has a way of choosing their university, which is so normal for Quebec families, for us, it's a dream that couldn't seem far, but we should have that right too.
I will cherish this dream, and I even make this a mission to make sure that my children have the choices, have the choice of this all at the same time. Thank you for our grandmothers, our wonderful warriors, because they're undergoing the impacts of colonialism, but they gave birth to these wonderful children who are changing things. So thank you very much to all our women as well. And we postponed the forum, but this allowed us to mobilize what was important, and these webinars allowed us to enter people's imaginations through technology to once again to speak the truth and talk about what hurt us, but once again to also talk about what's full of hope and the dreams we have and the collaboration that I call that is crucial for me at the overall or holistic level. The perception of concepts and ambition begins at conception until your last breath. So all of this early childhood center, elementary, high school, etc., post-secondary, all these centers we have in the communities, universities. If we don't work together on this, we're not going to succeed. But if we work together, but I think that we'll continue what they asked us to do before we arrived. So this is very important, and I'm very happy to have met Johanne. You're a great leader in Quebec, and I thank you for saying things as they are in Quebec culture. Yes, we're good, we're beautiful, we're strong, and so thank you for stating these truths with such passion. And also, like for me, sometimes school wasn't easy, but once we get into these institutions, we meet some really wonderful people, and it's important to emphasize this. Thank you, Michèle. Ms. Jean. Thank you, Michèle. You're just so inspiring in your words, and I'd like to thank our panelists for this afternoon. Yes, as you said, we've taken a few steps and great steps, and it's thanks to the webinar that we organized throughout the year. But I would like to say that we should continue and advance even more, and allow myself to say that I totally share your dreams. There's no doubt about that. And I also like to say that for too many decades, the members of the First Peoples have been asking for the recognition of their historical truth. We hear this in the ambassadors' messages, the recognition of their culture, their values, their language, so they can take their rightful place. We cannot be deaf to these repeated calls. The ball is in our camp, and that's where we have to engage, and that is the goal of the National Forum on Reconciliation, to exchange, to inspire each other, and also take a step forward together, and to have our establishments and universities evolve to make them safe, welcoming, and responsible places, and leading to the success of all people. The sixth edition of the Reconciliation Forum, I'd say that the Indigenous partners have really set the bar high. During the 3 days of the event, it was expected that each of the actors of the university institutions to take a further step, to take a firm engagement, to do more and better with towards the First Nations. Yes, I know a lot of actions have been taken in this sense in many establishments. There's a lot of universities who have been hired, who have been engaged in this process for decades, others who are joining in. But we've seen this in the inquiry that I published with 19 Quebec University establishments, and my team, myself, we identified many means where we can inspire each other, and also to strengthen this mobilization in the future forums. What we're doing today is we're making a call for engagement. We're making this call for engagement to allow everybody to express their intent. The mechanism is very simple. It's like the calls that are adopted for scientific symposiums. It addresses directors, the directors of faculties, the heads of departments, the professors, people in charge of the programs, all the staff, the student associations, and of course the ministry, organizations, unions, briefly, all the people who have an impact on our university life from throughout the country. And sometimes in the university ecosystem, you're invited to submit a proposal exposing an action that you wish to deploy in the next year. And why not? You can submit several proposals. Each proposal should represent an action that should reach the 6 main themes that were established over the last 5 webinars. The first hub is awareness in secondary, post-secondary education, and also access to university studies. A third, the support and student support, teaching and pedagogy, and fifth, research, and the last is governance. So you'll have until June 28th to make your proposals. The details of the call for engagement will be are on a document that's available through a link in the chat room, and it's also available on the forum's website. And we ask you to distribute this throughout your whole network. And the programming communities are made up of people from various universities and various Indigenous educational organizations will study the studies based on a series of criteria. I'll just name 3 that are particularly important: the originality of the engagement, the transformational scope of the project, and its inspirational character. And the proposals that will be retained by the programming committee, which will be entered into the 6 workshops, which will be as a part of the structure of the forum's program. And Michèle and I as well, the spokespersons as well, we ask you to reserve next September 21st, 22nd, and 23rd for the forum. We regret this, that the event will be held at a distance, virtually, but despite this constraint, we are working so that this event meets its main objective to ensure that these 3 days are a moment in a much longer trajectory, and could also mark the beginning of an era where all of the actors of the Canadian universities can take a step forward to move forward, or even accelerate changes already begun for the First Nations. So altogether, we can allow this ambition to be realized as quickly as possible. That's one of our greatest ambitions. So thank you very much for your participation and your inspiration. Thank you. What wonderful words. I hope that with movement, we can make a difference. And yes, we've set the bar high because that's where it deserves to be. And I am really, really eager to see the results of the forum, which is coming very soon. So now we're coming to the end of our 5th webinar and the series of webinars as well, during which we had a great deal of content, which was very relevant. I invite you to view the webinars that are which are available on the website, and also the capsules made by the ambassadors. And none of this would have been possible without participation of a great team behind this event. So I wish to really thank everybody who's worked very hard to make this series of events possible. And Michèle Dewell as well, who is on our coordination team. Thank you also to our 2 co-panelists, Suzy, Basile, and Denis Gros-Louis. Thank you very much to our 2 co-chairs, Michèle Audette and Ms. Johanne Jean. And also, without your presence, numerous presence at each of the 5 webinars, there are many of you to take part and stay here throughout the whole event, to stay here and provide us with your comments. So it's for you, all the participants. So that's why we're organizing this event. And it was also mentioned, thanks to all of the Indigenous partners at all the steps of the process, the colleges and the university, who will put the shoulder to the wheel so we can move ahead. And as before, we wish to conclude with a closing prayer. So once again, Ms. Élisabeth Ashini, thank you for being with us today. It was always great to have you with us. So for this closing prayer, Ms. Ashini, we leave the floor to you. The prayer is in the Innu language, so I won't be translating this part.
Bonjour.
Hello.
Je disais, ça a été un plaisir pour moi.
It was a pleasure for me to attend your meetings when I could.
Un gros, que ça me fait du bien.
It really does me a lot of good. And I also wanted to tell you, I would like us to think of the 215 children. Well, we don't know if they were sick, who were buried in a residential school. This really hurt me. This really shook me up because I'm a survivor from the residential school, and when I hear about things like that, it brings back these memories, and sometimes it can that we still feel the scars from this, and it seems it's almost as if the wound reopens. And I had a lot of difficulty recovering from this when this happened. And also for Ms. Joyce Ashukan, I thought of her, and I was following her story. And I also wish to thank Suzy Basile. I heard her speak. I missed her speech when or presentation, but from what I heard, it was very moving. And also Michèle Audette. It's always a pleasure to hear her. When I see her take part in these programs, and when she's interviewed, she's very sincere, and we see that when she speaks. So I'll ask you to think of the 215 children and Ms. Joyce Ashukan for 1 minute. I'll ask you to to pray for them.
Bon. J'aurais aimé ça vous parler mon parcours, mais c'est trop long, c'est trop. Ce sera une autre fois.
I would have liked to talk about my life path, but it would be too long, and it would be for another time.
Plein de choses qui m'est arrivé.
Many things have happened to me in my life, but it'll be for another time. My friends, so we're going to thank the Creator for the meeting we had. And I really like this, and also to the ambassadors as well, who will continue to look forward. We, the elders, who will support you through prayer. We'll pray for the youth who want to go to college and university. And I'm happy that there's been some development in the CEGEP question as well. The prayer is in Innu, no translation here.
Je vous souhaite une belle.
So I wish you
de vous reposer au mois de septembre.
So rest well, and we will see each other again in September. And I'm quite sure of this. Thank you, Johanne, and all the people who are with us. Thank you very much. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. No problem. You're so precious to us. We love you as you are. And regarding the subject of your life story, and I'm sure that during the September forum, you'll be invited to share this with you, and we can make a room for you in the programming. I'm quite sure of this. So thanks for having been with us today. And I was the honor. My name is Alexandre Bacon, and it was my honor to facilitate these different webinars. So I wish you well, be safe, have a great summer, and I hope to see many of you in September. And Elisabeth, a last word. I just want to send kisses to Suzy, if she's there. Yeah, she received them. I love you, Suzy. I'm gonna start getting jealous. There are no kisses for me. I don't know. I would like to give kisses to everyone, so I don't want to make everyone other people jealous. There was no more wonderful way to close this seminar. Thank you for sending out your love to all of us, and for all of you, I wish you a great day, end of the day, and take care.